Welcome to UI5ers Live, the webcast where we bring you what's new from the Open UI5 and SAP UI5 world. My name is Margot Woldy and this is episode 60. We have two nice topics again on the agenda, and first, building Fiori Launchpad plugins has long meant fighting with boilerplate and outdated tooling. Yeah, and there is a solution for this now, a generator that scaffolds Launchpad plugins using TypeScript and the current extension API. And Mario Kernich, he built this generator. He's from the community and he will walk us through this. So welcome, Mario, once again to the show.
Hi.
And then we look at how UI5 apps can embed modern open source visualization libraries like Three.js as first-class UI5 custom controls. And Manasi, Mishra, and Rakshitha, Komma, I hope I pronounced that correctly, are joining us from the SAP Visual Business in a visual business space to show us what's possible and how to get the pattern right. So welcome both. Nice to have you here in the show. Yeah, and in addition, we have Stefan Beck, Peter Müßig, and Andreas Kunz with me.
Hi.
Hi. And for sure, we'd love your questions in the chat, so drop them as we go. And Mario, let's see what you have built.
Thank you for the invitation again. It's my second time here on UI5ers Live. And yeah, let's talk about a new generator for Fiori Launchpad plugins, and which uses the extension API and latest tech like TypeScript. So at the beginning, let's have a look at the agenda, which topics, parts we will see today in this session. At the beginning, at the first, in general, what Fiori plugins are. Because I believe many people maybe don't know that Fiori plugins exist and they can be used. At the second, we have a deeper look at the plugin architecture, how the plugins are worked and injected in the Fiori Launchpad. We will have a comparison about the old and the new way, how we can use Fiori Launchpad plugins from the vanilla instance we got from the Fiori instance, and the new extension API we can use with UI5 1.120 above. And we have a look at the generator project and the UI5 community GitHub repository. And of course, a little live demo. We can see how the generator works in action. And at the end, a little talk about how we can deploy the plugin when we have completed development and can bring it to our system and serve it to our users and given the rights to use it. So let's start with the Fiori Launchpad plugins in general. So the most people maybe know that there are UI5 applications are possible. Less people maybe know that there are few UI5 libraries are possible. And I believe a handful people just know that there are also Fiori Launchpad plugins possible to use. And basically, they are very easy built. It's something we can use as background in the Fiori shell. And for example, in the Fiori homepage, or we can use it in standard apps we use from SAP, or a custom app, or any third-party app. That's the main advantage. We have a benefit over libraries, because when we use libraries for standard development, we have to inject it to each application manually, and the plugin works cross-app for advantage. And one important thing to say is that the Fiori plugins needs, of course, the Fiori shell itself, the Fiori Launchpad. And for this, we can only use it in SAP UI5 and not in OpenUI5, because OpenUI5 does not have an SAP usual extension available. So what can a plugin basically do? We can use the plugin to register header buttons. in the top right corner. We can extend user menu actions. We have also in the top right corner the user menu. We can add filters or side panels left or right side. We will show later. We can use it for usage tracking. For example, the user pressed a button and something happened or crashed, and the user tells, oh, this button I have not pressed. So we can see, okay, the user have pressed it 10 times or more. We have opportunity for global utilities, working with the standard JavaScript or window behavior like full skin toggle, theme helpers, and so on. We can use it for reporting solutions, like we can collect the application data. When an application starts, we can use the logs, the root data communication, and so on, or everything else as background in automation. And maybe your own idea you can resolve with Fiori Launchpad plugins too. Let's have a deeper look at the architecture. So the Fiori Launchpad plugins are very similar to the UI5 applications. So we will have a Component.ts or JS file as entry point. And so there you have all the other stuff like OData models or component metadata, which you can configure in the manifest.json file. Of course, your internet installation, translation, resource bundle files, your standard UI5 controls, and all the libraries you can consume. And the latest TypeScript ESLint and UI5 tooling is also possible too with the new generator project. And starting from the component init method, we can do all the things. We can use the extension API, for example, to work with the header or the user menu. We can use so-called frame bound extension to work with Future and sidepan to register some UI elements. And with some services like the AppLifeCycle, we can inject our application inside UI5 apps. When I open any UI5 app, I got a callback, okay, UI5 app opened, and I got the UI5 component instance. And at least we can get UserInfo to get information about the current user, which name, technical username, and so on. Okay, how is the old way we must use when we have UI5 less than 1.120? So we need the object path, and within the object path, we can get the usual container instance, and within the usual, we can get the runner instance and register, for example, a button using the add header end, the add header item method. And this is a little bit messy because this API changed multiple times when we go to different UI5 versions. And it's a bit misunderstanding what true, false, or something else begin. So we have always a look at API documentation, which was at this stand not very helpful. And yes, it's hard to maintain across different UI5 versions. And compared to the old API, we have here the new extension API we can use above 1.120 UI5 version. And so we just need the extension class we can fetch with the usual container. And we have here the create header item method, which is now well documented and version safe, and have all methods, for example, for all apps, which is required to enable it for all your 5 applications. You can also tell the plugin, okay, it should only display for the homepage, or you can both for homepage and for the plugins. And this is what the true and false parameters tell us here. We always need to find out what it does. So below, on the other hand, next to create a header item, there are also a create user action we can use to extend the user menu with an action. And this shows a button example. We can here use an icon and a text, and this can use both for button and user menu. And the press action, is the handler when we press on the user menu or button. And when we want to extend UI, like footer or side pans, we need another class, the frame bound extension. We will see some examples next slides. Yes, compared to the old renderer, we have better API documentation. It's less code we need. Yes, and more version safe across multiple UI5 versions which are coming. So to make it more easier to use the extension API, and of course, if we need older projects and we want to use latest stage like TypeScript, I created a generator project for the UI5 community. And it's very easy to use. You just can use the Easy UI5, as you will know, for the application or library projects which are already existing. And you have different presets, for example, using header button, user menu action, or just simple background service, which will generate some predefined code. And it considers the UI5 version you enter. If you goes above 1.120, you get the new extension API, and below you get the legacy render fallback automatically generated from the generator. And you have at least a Fiori Sandbox Launchpad included to test the plugin locally and making your stuff. So let's see a little live demo. See the generator in action. Here's the repository you can find in the UI5 community. And as already told, you simply need to use the Yeoman generator with Easy UI5. So I open the terminal and typing yo easy UI5. And now we can scroll down and pick our TS-FLP plugin, which is now available. So then it wants a namespace. Let's say de.kernich.button. So which plugin type do we want to create? Let's say Launchpad header button, and we can also use user menu or background service as already taught. So which framework? Let's use 1.151 latest, which is the author. That's me. New directory, yes. Would you like to initialize a Git repository local? Yes, of course. So it takes a little time until finished. So now it will also do an npm install automatically. And we have also all the other stuff in this boilerplate, like the application, like UI5 and so on. Okay, so project is generated. Now we have here the de.kernich.button project generated. So can open it. And now we see here similar structure like in your UI5 application with web app directory and so on. And the Component.ts file. So when we have a deeper look here, we see an init method, which calls an handle init method, which is async. And now we see here what the generator has written for us. We have here an E80 resource model declared, so we can use a translation. And here's the extension API. We will fetch from a container, usual. And we have here our create header item method, which call our extension API and tell him, okay, I want a button to register. So let's see it in action. So after I executed the npm run start command, the local FLP sandbox opens in my browser automatically. And as you see, in the top right corner, I have now a Hello World button. So if I checked it or compared it with the terminal, with the component, I see here it has the Hello World icon and the Hello World translated text. This is a tooltip. And the press action view shows a Hello World. So I can do everything like open pop-up or something else, everything I want. So on the other hand, we can create a user menu plugin. So execute the generator again. I want TS FLP plugin. So let's say de.kernich.userAction. Let's say user menu action, and now we use an older version like 1.108.5055. Same settings as previous used. So now we get, in case of this older UI5 version, the legacy fallback variant in this generator.
That would have been my question, Mario. If this is happening based on the version, yeah. Nice.
So now we see the generated project, and we can open the user action project. And now we see same structure. And we have here a little bit more code because we need the getRenner method, which calls the usual to get the container instance, the container get the renner instance, and so on, which we use in line 3030. And finally, we can call the method at user action in this case. And here we have some additional stuff like control type, but a little bit misunderstanding because you can't use something else than sub button. So, okay, let's start it again. Okay, typing. So hopefully it works. Okay, now we see here a user action. Hello world. Very great, cool.
Cheers.
So, okay, cool. At UI5 documentation, I have found a page. Under samples, you can enter FLP. Don't use Fiori or plugin. You can find something with this keyword. Maybe we can change it. You need to enter FLP. And here you have more samples, like a header, item, user action I have shown. Or, for example, the footer and side pane options we have with the frame-bound extension API. So we have here footer options, which we can use across all applications if you want, or the side pane option, for example, left or right, things we can display across the whole Launchpad or applications.
Mario, we have to speed up.
Okay, speed up. Okay. If you want more information about the Fiori Launchpad things, I can suggest you to have a look at the blog post. So, for example, here is also described what you can do with AppLifeCycle to get the UI5 instance, or, for example, how to access the user information. And, okay. Then at least little words about deployment. You can use it both on-premise and SAP BTP, SAP BTP build works on. For on-premise, also you just need to normally deploy the plugin like your UI5 application. On-premise, you can use transactions UI2 FLP conf dev and UI2 FLP conf to enable it globally, or you can use shell plugin type instead of your UI5 plugin, UI5 application in catalog or role to assign it users you want to use it only. And on the SAP BTP side, SAP Buildbox server side, you have to attach incon and exploit and user role. So now we are at the end. Any questions?
I don't see a question in the chat so far. I posted a link to your blog post. So let's see. People, I think there was also feedback from the people that the UI5, the easy UI5 generator is pretty neat, yeah. And a thank you for this session was the result. So really nice work, Mario. I think this also simplifies a lot how the FFP plugins at the end can be built. Very nice work.
Yeah, definitely. I think
you.
we saw also in the chat that quite some people are working with the plugin. So I guess your generator is really highly appreciated in the community and will help a lot there.
Definitely.
Great to hear.
Yeah. So what you think, guys? Like, if there's no questions in the chat, do you have a question, or can we switch to the next topic?
My question was answered during the session about the versions, how to handle previous old versions and new versions. So from my point of view, we can go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Maybe there will be some time at the end, but I think our ladies have also quite some things to share. So
interesting topic as well.
Definitely, yes. So really looking forward to this already as well. So I don't know, to hand over to Mishra or.
Hello everyone, this is Manasi, and today along with my colleague Rakshitha, we will be speaking about UI5 beyond standard controls, wherein we'll be talking about how we can integrate third-party libraries into our standard UI5 applications. So before going into the control and visualization techniques, we will talk about the project setup very quick. So it's really simple. It's just 3 files: package.json, copy dependencies, and UI5.yaml. These 3 files are it. In the package.json, you declare the dependencies like what file will we be using, what version. In our case, for purpose of demo, we have used Three.js. So we define the dependencies in our package.js. In addition to that, we also define the script a script that will copy these dependencies to the web app folder. Why copy to the web app folder? Because our UI5 cannot see anything that is outside the web app folder. So whatever has been initialized during the npm install command, we just copy it to the web app folder as well, so that during runtime we can see it. The most important file to make sure that the app does not break midway is the UI5.yaml, wherein you include all the third-party libraries from the minification. Why? Because all these libraries are already minified, and running a UI5 minifier on top of an open source library might just break it, or if not break it, just slow down the build for no reason. So that's the setup. This is the simple setup that you need to include any third-party library in your application. Now, going on to the principle on how we host a third-party library onto our app, the principle is very simple. We say that SAP UI5 manages the entire screen, the layout, the lifecycle, everything. What we ask from UI5 is to give us a separate div, a small place in its own page, wherein we can render the third-party library independently. So what does this look like? Is something like this. So this is an UI5 page where we have 2 independent rendering models. We have a div outlined by blue, wherein Three.js has been injected. So Three.js runs on the rendering framework that it re-renders itself around 60 times per second, so that it can offer seamless animations and all. Whereas UI5, as we all know, renders when it detects a change on the screen. So here, if you see anything that I do inside the div that the Three.js is being rendered onto has nothing to do with the UI5. I can control everything, and that is being controlled only by the Three.js. The moment I trigger or mock change on the screen using this button is where I will see that, okay, UI5 was re-rendered again. You see here it restarted after 11 millisecond pause. Why? Because the screen had to be rendered again and the control was to be given. A few things that we need to take care of while from coding perspective when doing things like this. The first is to to intercept the calls wherein the third party libraries are being loaded, and because when in an ideal scenario when Three.js will load, it will load on its own, but when it renders on a UI5 screen, the UI5 screen has its own module loader. Now this library will try to load using that particular loader and it gets confusing. So what we do is there is this command amd true wherein we say that while this is being rendered, we ask the UI5 module loader to step aside for a bit and let it load, and then again it can take control. How is it rendered is very simple. We have a renderer here which gives nothing but a plain div to it, and then in the initialize we initialize it with the 3 WebGL renderer, and once UI5 framework confirms that okay, the rendering has been done in this thing, is when we actually paste this particular canvas onto that. We attach it to the UI5 this thing by append child command. So that's it. That these are the major 3 things that you need to do to render a file onto UI5 application. Given this has been done, now we will talk about how we can handle the events on this. Like, although these are independent rendering models, we don't want them to be isolated of each other. To provide a better visualization and interactive application to the customer, we obviously want this Three.js canvas to be able to communicate with the UI5 layer and UI5 layer to communicate with the Three.js. How do we do that? UI5 has given a simpler solution to this. We already have events like fire object select, fire press, fire drop that can be called to handle any interactive thing that is done on here. So what we do is we detect a particular Three.js movement and whatever event is there. For example, suppose I am dragging and dropping this box. So Three.js event is mouse move here. Inside, whenever a mouse move is done, I call the UI5 fire drop event, and I send it all the information that I can with the library, like what type of object was clicked, where was it dropped, and everything else that the UI5 needs to know. Once this is done, UI5 fire drop is called, and UI5 takes care from there on what is to be done on this action. A very commonly used application of this is a right click details menu or context menu. For instance, if I right click this box, so you see here this particular detailed screen has been opened. What this does is basically when I right click this box, a fire object select was called based from the Three.js, and UI5 took over from there. Although it looks like this is a box on the Three.js canvas, it is actually a UI5 element floating on top. How does it know where to float? Is basically because when calling the event, UI5 event, we told it the page coordinates on where the right click was made. That's it from my end. I will hand over to Rakshitha to let you know further about the MapLibre library.
Thank you, Manasi. So far, we have seen how Three.js was used as a third-party library. Now, I'll take you through the MapLibre as a third-party library. So, similar way as we have already seen, we have to create a SAP UI5 custom control. Inside that, we have to create another container using a div element to render the third-party library. And inside that, we have to load the map. So now I have loaded the map. Now to display the locations, I am loading the spots. To connect the 2 locations, I'm also loading the routes. Now the question comes, where does this data comes from? So this data is coming from the backend in the UI5 JSON format. So that JSON will have the type of the key, position in the latitude, longitude format to spot on the map. And but unfortunately, this the JSON format MapLibre doesn't understand. So we have to convert that into the GeoJSON format, which MapLibre will understand and load onto the map. So this conversion we are doing in the VBI transformer. So the logic is, first we are getting the data and we are parsing that data here, and then we are converting that into the GeoJSON format, and then we are parsing that, and then we are feeding that data to the MapLibre to load the data onto the map. So this is how the flow to render the data. So to understand this in a better way, I'll take you through the real-time application, that is the SAP Visual Business. So this is integrated with SAP Transportation Management. This is at the production scale and many customers are using this. So here this is a transportation cockpit screen. So here we have loaded the map. Now next I want to load the spots and routes. For that we have already created a freight order with the defined source location and the destination location. So now if I load this freight order onto the map, we will see the spots got loaded with the route connectivity. So when I hover over on this spot, I'll get the information about that particular spot, same for the other spot too, and same for this route. So this is how the data rendered. Now to make this map more interactive, we can also add some events on top of it, that is based on our requirement. So for instance, now when I do right click on this spot, we will see the context menu of this particular spot. So this context menu will have the details for this specific spot. So when I click on this show details, it will navigate me to the display location screen. So this is the place where we are maintaining that location with the geographical data, longitude, latitude information to load the spot. So this is again coming from the transportation management only. So this is how we can make the map application in more interactively. So, but one question here is how backend knows that we are right clicking. So this information MapLibre will collect the major three information when a user right clicks. So it will first collect the geographical data of this particular spot in a longitude, latitude format, and the second is the XY pixel of the browser, and the third is that it will collect the type of the spot, and it will pack together as a JSON object, and it will send this data to the backend, and backend will process the data and take the action accordingly. So in that manner we are getting this pop-up on the screen when I right click on the spot. Yeah, so this is how this communication between the two applications takes place. So, and one more thing, one interesting thing here is when we see the context menu, it looks like it is on the map layer, but that's not the case actually. So when we see this context menu on the UI5 layer on top of MapLibre canvas. So it works like there is a MapLibre canvas, on top of it we have a UI5 layer. In that, this context menu got loaded. So this is a UI5 element. So SAP UI5 will control this whole actions, whatever we do on this menu. So this is how it works. So to summarize everything, what we have seen now, so whatever be the application, it always remains the same. The pattern always whatever be the application, the pattern always remains the same. So first, there will be 4 simple steps for integration. So first, to host the container. So SAP UI5 will host a container. This is used to manage the life cycle of the layout and the layout and managing of every life cycle of the layout. So, and the second step is we have to render the third party library by creating the development. And the third step is, if we want to further render the data on it, we need a data transformation layer. This will transform the application data to the library specific data, so that the data transform takes place in a better way. And the last step is event translation mechanism. So external events need to be converted to SAP UI5 standard events by using the fire press, attach press, and fire submit methods, so that the communication between the two applications takes place in a better way. So this is how the integration pattern works for every application, whatever be the library. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you. If you have any questions, we are happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you both for that. So there are questions indeed in the chat. One thing I would like to add in the beginning, Manasi, when you showed the integration of the Three.js library, there is also a nice tooling extension available. If, for example, if you could use it, the UI5 tooling modules, where you could directly from the npm packages consume like the Three.js, and then this gets already converted into UI5 AMD-like module and can be loaded directly as if you require that. So this helps you at the end to translate these modules, and this is also a nice thing everyone should maybe use also in case of these third-party packages if you use them, because you can avoid all these configuration pieces with that. But it depends now on in which scenario it's being used. For your case, it works also fine like that, but I wanted to add. So anything else from someone in my round here or from the chat? If not, then Margot, it's time to end.
Yeah, I guess, and it's also fine when you are ending this, but yeah, I guess if there are no questions, then I guess first of all we have to thank all our guests. It was really great that you prepared this. Great demos, and what I could read, at least I could see from the chat, also they really appreciate it and realize that they have similar issues and so on. So it's always good to have this here on our channel. And yeah, I guess with this, then let's close. Sorry for the hiccups at the beginning. So still exploring and trying to get into this technique. But thanks for staying with us, and thanks for sharing your questions and thought with us, and saying goodbye and see you next time.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.